The sun barely rose on the horizon when the first rays of light crossed the mountains surrounding Nova Esperança. The village, a small refuge amidst chaos, was slowly waking up. The residents, an eclectic group of survivors, reflected the diversity of the world before the catastrophe. Engineers, farmers, teachers, and even artists, all united by a single goal: to survive and thrive in a world in ruins. The earth had changed drastically. The once vibrant cities were now shadows of what they had been, devastated by wars, pollution, and natural disasters. Tropical storms had become torrential. Droughts turned vast regions into barren deserts, and earthquakes tore through the land as if the earth itself were suffering. Humanity, in its struggle for control, had forgotten to respect nature, and now paid a high price. In the center of the village, a small cabin served as the meeting point. Dr. Elias, a scientist who had previously worked on sustainability projects before the collapse, had become the leader of the group. He believed that the key to survival lay in knowledge and unity. "Good morning, everyone," Elias began as the inhabitants gathered around him. "Today is a new day, and we need to discuss the challenges we face. The climate is changing, and we must prepare." The faces around him reflected concern but also determination. Among them was Lara, a young engineer who had designed rainwater harvesting systems to help the community. Beside her was Marco, a farmer who had learned to cultivate in arid soil. Together they formed a vital team for the village's survival.
"We need to find ways to protect our crops and ensure we have enough water," suggested Lara. "The recent rains have been scarce, and if we don't take action, we risk losing our food source."
Elias agreed. "Let's divide our tasks. Lara, you and Marco can work on building irrigation systems. The rest of us can help reinforce the structures of the houses and the warehouses. We need to ensure this place remains safe." As the day progressed, the sound of tools and voices echoed throughout the village. Everyone had a role to play, and collaboration became the driving force that kept them united. However, a sense of apprehension lingered in the air. Nature always proved unpredictable. That night, after an exhausting day of work, the residents gathered around a campfire. The flames danced, casting shadows on the walls of the houses. Stories of past lives were shared, creating a bond of camaraderie. Yet, deep down, everyone knew the calm was temporary. Elias gazed at the starry sky, lost in thought. He knew that while the community was preparing for the challenges of daily life, a storm was approaching. Not only in the weather, but also in human interactions and the tensions that could arise. What would happen to Nova Esperança if nature decided once again to demonstrate its power? As the residents laughed and shared hopes, a cloud of uncertainty hung over the future. Dr. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, determined to believe that together they could face whatever came their way. After all, humanity's true strength lies in its ability to unite, even in the darkest hours. The awakening of a new day brought not only challenges, but also the promise that the struggle for survival was just beginning. The sky the next morning looked different. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, like a threatening cloak about to burst. The air was heavy, and a chilling wind blew through the mountains, bringing with it a portent that something terrible was approaching. The residents of Nova Esperança, accustomed to reading the signs of nature, sensed that this storm would be more than just a simple rain. Dr. Elias, concerned, called for an urgent meeting in the central cabin. The sound of hurried footsteps and nervous whispers echoed as the inhabitants gathered, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "We are facing a storm that may be one of the strongest we've ever seen," Elias began, his voice deep and firm. "We need to act quickly to protect our community. We cannot underestimate the power of nature." Lara, with her always watchful gaze, raised her hand. "What can we do, Elias?" "We should reinforce the structures of the houses and ensure everyone has safe shelter." "Yes, exactly," he replied. "Let's divide our tasks. Some people will reinforce the houses, while others will help ensure we have enough supplies. We need everyone's efforts to face what is to come." The instructions were given quickly. Marco and a group of residents rushed to the fields, trying to protect the crops with improvised barriers made of wood and stones. Meanwhile, others focused on reinforcing the doors and windows of the houses, using boards and nails they had been able to gather. As the day progressed, The sky darkened. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. A distant sound, resembling a roar, echoed in the mountains. Panic began to spread among the residents, but Dr. Elias remained calm. "Stay together. Remember what we discussed. We need to be strong and united," he exclaimed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of apprehension. When the storm finally hit Nova Esperança, it was as if the very sky had torn apart. The torrential rain poured down, and the howling winds seemed intent on tearing everything from its place. The trees swayed violently, and the sound of water hitting the ground was deafening. Darkness enveloped everything, and the inhabitants took refuge in their homes, clinging to their fear. Inside the cabin, Elias and some residents gathered to monitor the situation. The noise was intense, but he knew they needed to remain vigilant. The storm raged for hours, and each second felt like an eternity. As the residents laughed and shared hopes, a cloud of uncertainty hung over the future. Dr. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, determined to believe that together they could face whatever came their way. After all, humanity's true strength lies in its ability to unite, even in the darkest hours. The awakening of a new day brought not only challenges, but also the promise that the struggle for survival was just beginning. The sky the next morning looked different. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, like a threatening cloak about to burst. The air was heavy, and a chilling wind blew through the mountains, bringing with it a portent that something terrible was approaching. The residents of Nova Esperança, accustomed to reading the signs of nature, sensed that this storm would be more than just a simple rain. Dr. Elias, concerned, called for an urgent meeting in the central cabin. The sound of hurried footsteps and nervous whispers echoed as the inhabitants gathered, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "We are facing a storm that may be one of the strongest we've ever seen," Elias began, his voice deep and firm. "We need to act quickly to protect our community. We cannot underestimate the power of nature." Lara, with her always watchful gaze, raised her hand. "What can we do, Elias?" "We should reinforce the structures of the houses and ensure everyone has safe shelter." "Yes, exactly," he replied. "Let's divide our tasks. Some people will reinforce the houses, while others will help ensure we have enough supplies. We need everyone's efforts to face what is to come." The instructions were given quickly. Marco and a group of residents rushed to the fields, trying to protect the crops with improvised barriers made of wood and stones. Meanwhile, others focused on reinforcing the doors and windows of the houses, using boards and nails they had been able to gather. As the day progressed, the sky darkened. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. A distant sound, resembling a roar, echoed in the mountains. Panic began to spread among the residents, but Dr. Elias remained calm. "Stay together. Remember what we discussed. We need to be strong and united," he exclaimed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of apprehension. When the storm finally hit Nova Esperança, it was as if the very sky had torn apart. The torrential rain poured down, and the howling winds seemed intent on tearing everything from its place. The trees swayed violently, and the sound of water hitting the ground was deafening. Darkness enveloped everything, and the inhabitants took refuge in their homes, clinging to their fear. Inside the cabin, Elias and some residents gathered to monitor the situation. The noise was intense, but he knew they needed to remain vigilant. The storm raged for hours, and each second felt like an eternity. A woman named Sophia, one of the community's most dedicated farmers, knelt in the mud, tears streaming down her face. "I've lost everything, Elias. My harvest, my livelihood. What will we do now?" Her voice trembled, full of pain and despair. Elias approached and knelt beside her. "Sophia, I know it's hard. We are all feeling the pain of loss. But we need to remember that we are alive. And that is something we should be grateful for. Together we can start over." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. But something in her expression began to change. "How can we start over if everything we've built has been destroyed?" "One step at a time," Elias replied, his voice firm. "Let's gather and discuss how we can rebuild. We need to find hope where it seems there is none." As the day passed, the residents began to gather in the central cabin. The atmosphere was heavy, but Elias's presence brought some comfort. He began to speak about the need to unite and support one another, even in the face of adversity. "Today we mourn our losses, but tomorrow we will begin to work together," he said. "The strength of Nova Esperança lies not just in our houses or our crops, but in our ability to support one another and find solutions. We must remember who we are and what we are capable of." After the meeting, some people began to stand up, motivated by his words. Lara, with her innovative spirit, suggested, "We can use what remains of the crops and try to replant. If we focus on small areas, perhaps we can cultivate something again." Marco, ever optimistic, added, "And we can use what we learned from the storm. We can create drainage systems to prevent water from accumulating in the next rains." Gradually, the energy in the cabin began to shift. The sadness was still present, but a new determination started to emerge. The idea of rebuilding was not just about the houses or the harvests, but about the very essence of the community. The next day, the village began to mobilize. They divided tasks, with some focusing on clearing debris and others on salvaging what they could from the crops. The work was hard, but the sense of purpose and unity began to restore hope to their hearts. In the following weeks, the community worked tirelessly. With each passing day, small victories were celebrated. The houses began to be repaired, and the fields were prepared for new planting. The pain of loss was still felt, but each step taken towards rebuilding strengthened the bonds among them. Elias, observing the progress, felt a wave of pride. He knew that each person was contributing to something greater. Nova Esperança was not just a name, but a symbol of the struggle and resilience of humanity. That night, after an exhausting day of work, the residents gathered again around the campfire. Now, instead of tears, there were laughter and stories of overcoming. They shared plans and dreams, imagining a future where they could flourish once more. Elias, with a smile, raised an improvised cup. "To a new beginning, may we always remember that, even in the darkest hours, the light of hope can shine if we are together." With warm hearts, they toasted to life, unity, and resilience. The morning was still present, but now it was intertwined with hope. Nova Esperança was rising again, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Weeks passed, and the community of Nova Esperança continued to rise again. The houses were being repaired, and the fields, though still damaged, began to show signs of life. The spirit of collaboration and the determination of all became the central force of the village, but the struggle for survival was never far from anyone's mind. One morning, while a group of residents was clearing the forest in search of wood for repairs, Lara and Marco separated from the main group. Eager to find useful materials, they ventured deeper than usual, exploring an area that few had visited since the collapse. After a long and tiring walk, they came across an old structure covered in vegetation. The building was almost hidden among the trees, but its outlines were clear. An abandoned laboratory, with broken windows and walls weathered by time, sparked their curiosity. "Look at this, Marco. It seems like an old laboratory," Lara said, her eyes shining with excitement. "We might find something useful here." "Let's investigate," Marco replied, feeling adrenaline rush through his veins. They approached and pushed open the rusty door, which creaked as it opened. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust, but the atmosphere was electrically charged with the promise of discoveries. The two began to explore the rooms, finding laboratory equipment covered in dust, shelves filled with jars and yellowed documents. Lara, with her technical knowledge, started examining the equipment. "Look at this, Marco. Here are some graphs about soil quality and climate conditions," she said, holding a notebook that seemed to have been used by researchers long ago. "This data could help us understand the changes we're facing better." Meanwhile, Marco rummaged through a table full of jars. "And here it looks like we have soil and water samples. If we can understand what happened in this region, maybe we can apply that knowledge to our crops." Their enthusiasm was contagious. With each new item found, the idea that they could revive the devastated land began to take shape. They decided to select the most useful materials and take them back to the community. Upon returning to Nova Esperança, the news of the discovery spread quickly. Dr. Elias was intrigued to see the data and samples that Lara and Marco brought. "This is incredible. These graphs can provide us with valuable information about what worked in the past and what might work now," he said, examining the documents carefully. If we can apply these principles, we can revitalize our crops and even improve the quality of the water we use. With the help of the community, they began to organize the information and plan experiments. Using the lab samples, Lara and Marco dedicated themselves to understanding how the land could be restored. The work was not easy, but each small advance brought a new breath of hope. Days turned into weeks, and the community began to see results. The crops started to thrive in areas where the lab techniques were applied. The once infertile soil began to recover, and new life was forming in Nova Esperança. The discovery of the laboratory not only brought knowledge, but also renewed the community's faith in a better future. The difficulties they had faced in the past weeks now seemed more bearable when viewed in light of new possibilities. At a community meeting, Elias stood up to speak. "We are here today not only to celebrate what we have accomplished, but to remember that our struggle does not end here. We have new knowledge that we can use to ensure that Nova Esperança is not just a refuge but an example of resilience and innovation." The residents applauded, and the atmosphere was charged with positive energy. With faces lit by hope, they prepared to continue working, knowing that together they could face any challenge the future held for them. As the months passed, Nova Esperança began to rise from the ashes of the storm. The sun, once hidden by dark clouds, now shone brightly, warming the earth and bringing life back. The crops, although still young, showed signs of growth, and the community had become an example of resilience and determination. Dr. Elias observed the transformation with a mix of pride and gratitude. The lessons learned during the storm shaped the community's approach. With the knowledge gained, they implemented sustainable practices that not only helped restore the soil, but also protected against future calamities. One morning, while walking through the fields, Elias found Lara and Marco discussing new cultivation techniques. "We're thinking about implementing crop rotation and using organic fertilizers. This should help increase soil fertility," Lara said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Great idea. And we can also build raised beds to improve drainage," Marco added, gesturing with his hands. "We need to ensure our crops are prepared for any challenge." Elias smiled, admiring their passion. "You are doing an amazing job. The combination of knowledge and experience is what will allow us to thrive." Over time, the harvests began to bear fruit. The community, united in its mission, organized festivals to celebrate each new harvest. The atmosphere of joy and hope began to replace the pain of the past. The children, once traumatized by the storm, now ran freely through the fields, playing and laughing, symbolizing the resilience of the new generation. One day, as the villagers gathered for the harvest festival, a cloud of curiosity hung in the air. Dr. Elias climbed onto a small wooden box to address everyone. "Today, we celebrate not only our harvests, but also the strength we found in each other. Each of you played a crucial role in the rebuilding of Nova Esperança." Applause echoed and excitement filled the village. Tables were overflowing with fresh food, the fruits of hard work and collaboration. Laughter and stories of overcoming flowed, and the sense of community was palpable. However, Elias knew that despite the rebirth, the outside world still faced challenges. Climate change continued to affect other regions, and the struggle for survival was not over. He decided it was time to share what they had learned. With the help of Lara, Marco, and other villagers, Elias organized an exchange program with neighboring communities. He believed they could teach and learn from one another, forming a network of support and collaboration. The idea was simple: to share knowledge about sustainable practices and cultivation techniques that could help rebuild other affected communities. "Let's become an example of how unity and innovation can make a difference," Elias said in a meeting. "If we can help others rise again, we will be proof that it is possible to face any storm." Enthusiasm swept through the village. In the following months, groups from Nova Esperança began to travel to neighboring communities, bringing seeds, tools, and knowledge. The exchange of experiences became a source of inspiration, and soon other communities began to flourish. Meanwhile, in Nova Esperança, the rebirth was in full swing. The crops thrived, the houses were renovated, and the community was becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. Elias and the villagers realized they were not just rebuilding their lives, but also forming bonds that transcended the pain of the past. One night, as they gazed at the starry sky, Dr. Elias reflected on the journey they had taken. "I never thought the storm would lead us to such a beautiful place," he said, looking at Lara and Marco. "Sometimes it is in difficulties that we find our true strength," Lara replied, smiling. "And the solidarity we have built here is our greatest treasure." Marco's response was simple but powerful. "And now we are more than a community, we are a family." Years passed and Nova Esperança flourished. What was once a field devastated by the storm had transformed into an oasis of life and vitality. The houses, rebuilt with more resilient materials, proudly stood under the blue sky. The fields, once ravaged, were now filled with abundant crops, and the laughter of children echoed through the village streets. Dr. Elias, now an elder with gray hair and wise eyes, observed the transformation with a heart full of gratitude. He often gathered with the younger generation, sharing stories of past struggles and teaching them about the importance of connecting with nature. He believed that knowledge was the key to ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. On a sunny day, Elias called a meeting in the village's central square. Residents of all ages gathered, sitting on improvised chairs in the ground, eager to hear what he had to say. "Today we celebrate not only the harvests, but also the unity that has brought us here," began Elias, his voice soft yet firm. "What we have built together is a legacy that goes beyond our own interests. It is an example of resilience for future generations." The children, with bright eyes, listened attentively. They did not know the pain of the storm, but had grown up hearing stories of overcoming adversity. Lara, now a respected leader in the community, approached Elias. "Let's do something special to honor everything we've been through and everything we've achieved," she suggested. "How about an annual celebration of renewal? A festival that unites us all and reminds us of the importance of caring for our land and each other." The residents applauded the idea, and soon preparations began. The community came together once again, this time to celebrate life. Food, music, and dances were organized, with each person contributing something special to the event. On the day of the festival, the village was festive. Colorful banners decorated the streets, and the aroma of delicious dishes filled the air. The children danced and laughed, while the adults shared stories and memories. The atmosphere was filled with joy and gratitude. Elias, observing all this, felt a wave of emotion. He knew that the struggle they had faced had not been in vain. The community had become an example of how collaboration and hope could overcome even the most terrible challenges. During the festival, Elias stepped onto a small improvised stage and called everyone's attention. "Today we celebrate not only what we have achieved, but also the responsibility we have to protect our legacy. We must always remember that we are part of nature and that our actions have consequences. May this festival remind us that together we can face any storm that life presents us."